everybody. My name is Brad Muniz. I'm a partner at Sobel & Company. I'd like to welcome you to Sobel Insights. Sobel Insights is a weekly series providing some brief information on various topics. Our goal is to keep the session to 15 minutes. At this time, we do not offer CPE. If you have any ideas for topics or speakers, please feel free to email me. Today's topic, Excel functions. I asked Joe Zaff, a manager at Sobel & Company, to come in and talk about this topic. Now, we've been using Excel for years, but he has a very big interest in it. So, Joe, what is your big interest in this? Why are we talking about this topic?
Yeah, so Excel has so much power, and as accountants and professionals, we underutilize so many of the features of Excel, and there's so much power that Excel is capable of, and I think people need to understand some of the other benefits within the program.
So you're saying when I take my calculator like this and I add up the numbers and then enter that number in Excel, that's not using the power of Excel?
It is, and Excel has, of course, the power to do your typical add and subtract formulas, but there's so much more behind it that people don't know is even in the program.
So, and I agree with you, because I used to actually teach Lotus 1, 2, 3, which was a long time ago, okay? And I get infuriated when I actually saw younger people actually doing that with a calculator and then hard coding the number in and not even using the plus function or the sum function. But what are some of the other significant features I know that you use, and you talk to me about it, and it goes over my head sometimes?
Of course. Well, I love Excel, and it takes a while to learn some of the functionality of it, but the two that always come to mind of the called the more advanced use, you always hear of VLOOKUPs and pivot tables are the top two that come to mind. That if people just spend a little time learning those two, it increases so much of your value of Excel.
So I hear a lot about VLOOKUPs and lookups. They're different right there, right? Other than a letter.
So you'll hear a lot about VLOOKUPs, but lately Excel came out with a new formula called an X lookup. It probably came out about a year ago or so. An X lookup in the future will really replace a VLOOKUP for most people. It's just more user friendly. The formula is more user friendly, and it's more functional. VLOOKUPs, for example, you didn't have the ability to search to the left of your data that you can in an X lookup, and the formula just makes it so much more user friendly.
But so H lookup looks up information, and I guess the H is the horizontal.
Yeah, in the past there only used to be H lookups and V lookups. H was your horizontal lookup, V was your vertical. Now X lookup is kind of the replacement for. Okay,
so great. So now we've just introduced a spreadsheet of numbers that we're adding together, and you're introducing letters to us.
Yes.
So okay, so it's starting to blow. It's starting to blow because now you introduce something else called pivot tables, which I sit here and talk about in the office, and you kind of laugh at me when I'm like, yeah, H lookup, V lookup, pivot tables, and there's the difference between these, right?
Yeah, they're two different things. So V lookups are more useful when you're looking up a particular value. So you want to look up a certain, trying to think of an example, a certain criteria. You want to just look up the one exact match to that item in a table. So you're looking at one specific item, for example, where a pivot table is where you're taking a whole series of data, like a big data set, and you're breaking it down into specific columns and rows. And a pivot table is really just taking a big data set and crunching it down into more of a summarized table. Whereas a VLOOKUP or an X lookup, you're looking up one specific item. You don't have the whole table summarized anymore. Pivot tables are more analytical, and there's so much use that people can get out of pivot tables. And then it also gets into more of the dashboard feature, and you could really make pivot tables interactive to some extent with adding tools like there's slicer tools and things like that. You can make pivot tables very interactive and analytical.
So I guess in the lookups, we'll just refer to it that way. As you said, you're looking for one response to a particular set of immediate criteria, and it provides you with that response that you were looking for. If you're looking for inventory, the inventory item that we have this year, I want the price for last year. It's giving me the price that we had it at last year.
Exactly. It's going to give you that one item in the table, whereas in a pivot table, for example, you can look up that same item. Let's say it appears 10 different times in the table. You can have your columns do the sum of all of those same amounts. Pivot tables are a little more interactive in that sense.
So that's interesting, because when I've used pivot table, keeping it to our example of inventory, and because we have a lot of viewers at this that are trying to figure out how can I use, why would I use VLOOKUPs or the lookups or the pivot tables? In the past, when I was auditing inventory, and as I said, I wanted to have last year's inventory, that was all well and good if there was only one inventory item, or the item, XYZ for this year. And last year there was one row or one column with XYZ, and it just picked that up only.
Yeah.
But I have had the instance where it was spread all over the place, and then I sorted it, but I still had multiple rows of XYZ because it was different locations.
Exactly. So your V lookup or your H lookup formulas and the new X lookup, it's just going to pick that first item. Typically, if you have XYZ, that pops 10 times in a table. Whereas your pivot table, you can make it do the sum of all the XYZs in that table. It's better for analytics. You could also compare year to year. You can customize your columns and your rows to really drill down into the exact data that you need. And this all sounds confusing probably without seeing a data set, and a lot of times what I tell new users to this is it's not useful until you see what the functionality of it actually is in practice. It's like you don't know what you don't know until you see its use, and then it opens up so many features to Excel.
Well, it's got to be useful. I know that people are probably listening to two auditors talk right now and say, well, that's what you need it for. I just tell QuickBooks or Sage or whatever to run the report for me. But I know that, Fortune 100 companies are using pivot tables all the time to analyze GL accounts, sales by product, sales by customer. So I know that they're using the pivot tables, and I never hear them using lookups.
Yeah, and even simple admin functions sometimes. I mean, something as simple as analyzing a weekly timesheet or summarizing employee hours can have its pivot tables, and VLOOKUPs or X lookups can save so much time just in sorting something like that on a weekly basis. It really just depends on the files that you're getting and the data that you're trying to break down.
It's interesting. So it's also, you mentioned expense reports. If you have a lot of credit card bills, you're a nonprofit organization that's mainly a lot of time concerned is the executive director or another officer or within the organization using the credit cards inappropriately, or even a commercial organization, they're worried about somebody using credit cards inappropriately. If you can get the Excel format or convert something to an Excel format, you could probably sort the data or drill down
exactly.
the data.
With an example like that, you could take the credit card history for a month and summarize it in a pivot table by vendor and see the sum to all the different vendors throughout a month.
I'll keep it clean. And look for all the Amazon stuff.
Yeah, there you
go. Okay, that's interesting. So there is a much more use of it than an auditing tool. It helps you potentially analyze data.
Yep,
that's
absolutely.
Great. So I've walked, I've attended a lot of Excel. As I said, I taught Lotus 1, 2, 3. I'm old, people. And I actually taught Word Perfect, not even Word. Okay. So this was in the 80s and 90s. So, I'm familiar with some of the functionality, and I've attended, other trainings on Excel, but how do you find the best way everybody learns differently, but how have you found it best to learn these functions?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a millennial, so my generation goes right to YouTube all the time. I know that's probably the best way, and that's what I recommend to everyone trying to learn about specifically these two items that we touched on here, the VLOOKUPs and the pivot tables. You can watch a 10-minute YouTube video on this, and there's so many YouTube videos out there. It really is the best way to learn. I know a lot of times that's harder to tell to some of the older generations like yourself, Brad, but in the past, people always used to learn by going to seminars or live events, but really the best way to learn Excel is to go onto YouTube and just search for how to do a VLOOKUP in Excel, or how to work with pivot tables in Excel. And there's so many 101 pivot table examples. And what you can learn in a 10-minute video could save you hours and hours in the next couple of years of working. So that's what I recommend to a lot of our new staff who start here, and even a lot of clients sometimes. Just teaching how to do a simple VLOOKUP or a pivot table can save hours down the road.
Oh, I'm gonna have to say I agree with you on it, okay? Because you would have saved me 8 hours alone just because I attended an 8-hour seminar to figure out how to do pivot tables. And then I came back and never did a pivot table for a month and a half, and I forgot how to do a pivot table. So you would have saved me, and I've attended an Excel seminar at least 2 or 3 times, so 24 hours potentially. But even so much to the point where I got a new car, I couldn't figure out how the heck the cruise control worked on the car. And then when I read that manual, I read the manual before I bought it. I'm one of those guys. And I read that manual, but I went onto YouTube one day and I just said how to use cruise control. And within 2 minutes, I learned how to.
Yeah, and it's crazy. And it's like you said, sometimes if you don't use some of this functionality consistently, you'll forget and you'll lose it. But at least if you have that baseline knowledge of it from a YouTube video, well, you could always go back and refresh yourself with another 10-minute video if you know it's got the power to manipulate your data again. So you always have that resource just to go back to and refresh yourself.
So I guarantee whoever's watching this, they're going to try it, and they're going to do a YouTube video, and then they're going to have the tutorial up in front of it and everything, and they're going to get the error message. So the only thing that I'm going to offer, Joe, is that if you're doing this and you're getting an error message, call Joe. He'll be more than happy to help you.
Yeah, there you go. You can send me an email if you get an error message.
Reach out to Joe. He's happy to help you if you have any questions. I mean, you can't do a full Excel seminar, 8 hours. You can't do a full Excel seminar, but he's taught some of these functions in our office, and he's helped people with their formulas. So if you have any questions, reach out to us. Anything else, Joe, you want to recommend?
No, that's it. I would just recommend that everyone learns at minimum these 2 functions in Excel. Like I said, it'll just save hours in the future.
Great. So, Joe, I want to thank you for presenting this information, at least telling everybody about this information. Now they have to go on and put their hands on it and try it and play with it. And I want to thank everybody for watching. And if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to us, and look forward to seeing you at the next session.